I see.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this edition of the Packard Network Live. I'm really pleased to be live streaming to everybody today from most parts of the world. And it's great. I have a very special guest today that I'm going to introduce in a minute, and we're going to talk about a very important topic around very much related to culture and how to foster a positive culture in the workplace. So we'll kind of get into that in a few minutes. But I'm really pleased to have a special guest, Catherine Mattice, who's joining us live from San Diego, California, in the U.S. And Catherine, welcome to the program. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. And Catherine is the founder and CEO of Civility Partners, which is focused on helping organizations create respectful workplace cultures. And a big part of my network, I know, follows me because of their interest in strengthening and transforming cultures in many places as well. So that's why today's conversation is especially relevant. And Civility Partners focuses on Fortune 500, basically anybody, Fortune 500 companies to small businesses to nonprofits across many different industries. So that's something important for the viewers to know. And Catherine has been, you might have seen her. She's an HR thought leader in prestigious mainstream media like USA Today, Bloomberg, CNN, NPR, and many other national news outlets as well. So Catherine is kind of all over the place. So if she looks familiar, sounds familiar, you probably saw her in one of those media. And she's an award-winning speaker, an author, a blogger, and has, I think, close to 50 courses teaching global audiences on LinkedIn Learning. I don't know if I have that right, Catherine. Is that
I do, 48.
Close? Okay. Great. So welcome to the program. And just a little disclaimer to the audience. So I am dog sitting our 13-year-old Chihuahua who's at my feet right now and might appear in the screen. And Catherine's little boy is also kind of lurking in the background with there. So we promise to stick to the subject. But if these come up, this is our real life and they're not distractions. They're real human beings and real pets. So
yes.
That's a little disclaimer.
Part of culture is flexibility and vulnerability, right?
So yeah. So our versatility. Yes, that's right. Our versatility will be tested this morning. So
yes,
I think that's great. For those of you that are tuning in live on LinkedIn, please do tee up any questions. Let me know where you're from, and if you're tuning in live, and also tee up any questions as our conversation evolves. And I'll be very happy to call you out, and Catherine and I will be happy to address those questions. And if there's something, if any of you are watching this on the replay, I know that I do acknowledge that most of my network is in Asia and you're sleeping right now. So if you're watching this on replay, please do feel free to tee up anything, even though it's not live. And Catherine and I will be actively engaged and make sure that we get a response to your questions. So with that, Catherine, welcome again to the program, and it's happy Friday to you.
Thank you. Happy Friday.
Yes, absolutely. So Catherine, tell us, before we kind of get into the topic, tell us a little bit about how you wound up founding Civility Partners. That would be interesting to know.
Sure. So I was the director of human resources for an organization where one other person, I would say, was engaging in bullying behavior. And we were both directors. So he was my peer, not my boss. And we both reported directly to the president. And I saw firsthand and was sort of fascinated by the drama he was creating and the costs that I could see going out the door through his behavior. So as the director of HR, I was spending a lot of time counseling people who were seeking my help. I spent a lot of time talking to the president about this behavior. Could you please address it? And the boss would just say, well, that's just how he is. I don't know why it bothers you all. Just leave it be. And it's kind of like, well, that's your choice for dealing with his behavior, but this is not good. I was dealing with turnover in his office or in his department. And then I also was a target. So I was also experiencing being at the receiving end of that behavior. And over time, it was pretty frustrating and exhausting. And I started to get my master's degree in human communication and ended up doing all of my graduate research on the situation at work because I was so fascinated and troubled by it all at the same time. And so I just have a master's degree in workplace bullying, which is kind of the case there. Everything I did was on that topic. And then pretty quickly out of graduate school, I decided, you know what, I've read 40 years of academic research on this. So clearly it's a problem and I'm going to take it on. And so I just, through that process, had found a real clear niche that I was very passionate about. So Civility Partners was born.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's one thing to have a passion and a purpose and everything, but a lot of people don't have the courage to actually take that plunge and pursue it on a full-time basis. Did you struggle with that at all? And if you did, how did you actually take that plunge?
You know what? So yes, it was a big struggle. So the deal was that I got out of graduate school in 2007, and I had during that time transitioned from that workplace to a new place where it was a IT kind of marketing tech firm. They had just gotten $10 million investment. And so they were going to be using that to build their team and all of that. And I was going to be doing their HR, but then the recession hit and I got laid off. And so that's when I officially was like, I'm definitely doing this now because there's a recession. Rather than go and get a job, I'm just going to start this. And sorry, you can probably hear my 3-year-old.
No, that's okay.
And then, the biggest challenge about all of that is at the time, nobody was talking about workplace bullying. This was just not a phrase. And I would call, so when I started, I would call HR associations, hey, can I come and speak at your chapter meeting? I have this great new topic, and they're telling me that's not a thing. We already talk about harassment. We don't need you to talk about bullying. What is that even? And literally every single person I knew was telling me, you can't have a business around bullying. You can be a leadership coach or, hey, bud, quiet down, please. Thank you. Literally every person I knew was like, you could be a leadership coach or you could do communication skills training, but bullying, I don't think you can have a business around that. So against the entire world telling me no, here I am.
Good for you. Don't tell Catherine that she can't do something that she's passionate about, right?
Right. Well, and the thing was too, it's like, look, I've read all of this research and you all haven't read it. So I know it exists and it's a real thing. Yeah. And so, I guess that was part of it, was just recognizing, I know you've not heard of it, but I have, and I know it's a problem, and I will just watch me.
Right, exactly. And so how's it been going? I mean, you got into this when the pandemic hit, and now it's been a few years. How's it going overall?
Well, this is my I think my 13th year. So I started in 2009.
Okay.
And so I started, I was teaching college at the time as well, part-time adjunct to different community colleges. So that was a great help as I started to build. And then over time, I was just able to let go of the coaching, and Civility Partners was able to take over. And now I've got a team of 7, and we've got global clients, and, I've got my learning courses that are global. So we're doing pretty good. We're just focused on.
Yeah. That is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Good. Okay. So let's see. I'm not seeing a lot of comments in the LinkedIn session, so I don't know if there's a technical issue or what have you, but let us know where you're at. Tee up anything that's on your mind, and we'll certainly be happy to get around to that, but we're going to proceed in the meantime. So Catherine, just why don't we kind of start with some, I find that people get lost in terminology sometimes as well. Why don't we start by maybe just having a chat about what is a toxic culture inside of a company, and we can talk about bullying and other things as well, or stick with bullying. I'm fine with that, but I want to kind of get some, and then we're going to talk about what is a what's a healthy culture, so that we can kind of maybe start with that, and then we'll build from there. Yeah.
Sure. So here's my answer. I could tell you all day long what I think toxic means, but I would say the real answer is that leaders and managers and supervisors should be talking to their employees about what a toxic work environment looks like. And we throw that word around a lot because of the work that I do. In my mind, a toxic work environment is anything that ranges from, if there's a lot of incivility or kind of gross sarcasm or inappropriate sarcasm, that sort of lower level stuff that's not illegal but still hurtful, and leaves people not feeling psychologically safe. I would say toxic ranges from that all the way up to, of course, real toxic, where there's maybe a lot of fear, bullying, harassment, that sort of thing. Because we throw around toxic so loosely, I don't necessarily have an answer. I can tell you what I think it is. But I do want to point out that I agree with you that we get caught up in terminology, and that's part of the problem. So for HR, for example, which is kind of my people, it's like there's this weird gap where, because, for example, we're required to do harassment prevention in a lot of states, and a lot of savvy companies do it anyway, even if they're not required. Sorry, my son's here.
It's okay.
That because of that, and because it's so compliant focused, that we've lost sight of the fact that harassment is a people problem, not a compliance problem. And so it seems like it's like there's harassment and then everything else that we don't really pay attention to. And we teach managers to keep their eyes out for harassment. But what about all the other stuff? Do managers know that should they, and do they have the tools to coach a team member who gossips a lot, or, engages in this sort of lower level behavior that's still toxic, but it's not illegal? So just kind of want to comment on that there's such a big array of toxic behaviors. We got to stop focusing only on harassment.
I agree with that. And I think that there's also a big part of the audience that will ultimately see this conversation are in the other countries as well, where harassment might be acknowledged by the law, and in other cases there might not be any laws around it, but yet people still feel the same way. If they're bullied, it doesn't matter where you're at, right? And
that's one thing where America is a little far behind, and so is the Asian world, where we, in places like France and Europe, psychological harassment is something they use, which refers to kind of all of it: harassment, bullying, anything that damages somebody psychologically. But here we're only focused on harassment. I wrote an article for an HR magazine in Japan only maybe 2 years ago, and they were saying they just don't have this phrase of workplace bullying at all. So that's the other thing too. And so you end up being workplace by workplace. You have to decide in your workplace, what does a toxic work environment look like? What kind of culture do we want? That kind of thing.
I think you're right. As you know, I lived in Japan for 6 years and ran a huge part of a very large business. It was an American company. And I remember my first week there, I sat in on an interview of somebody. And the first question that was asked from the HR director in this interview is, "What is your age?" And which is natural to do in Japan, right? It's just part of the culture as well. And of course, that was the last time that they ever asked that question on my clock anyway, because we were an American company, and part of our, part of what I wanted to bring there was a more balanced way of doing things, because people can perceive the fact that if they're asking me my age or using that as a determination, even though there's no law against it, perhaps they are discriminating, and that person could actually feel bullied, harassed, however, as well. So again, that's a
100%.
great example that you raised on Japan and my experience as well. So I think that's important as well. What do you see if you flip the coin around as a healthy culture?
Honestly, it has to do with psychological safety and vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
which I said at the beginning. So I think the more an organization allows and even encourages people to be their true selves, the more
Mm-hmm.
healthy it is. A healthy culture is where people feel comfortable to say how they feel about an idea related to the company without fear of repercussion. They feel safe to say how they feel about something personally. Hey, I feel that this happened and it hurt my feelings. I want to talk about it. That they feel like they're growing and thriving and being given opportunity.
Right.
So it's an organization that focuses on the people that work there. And even that phrase, speak of terminology, human capital. What does that even mean? I hate that phrase.
Right.
So it's a place where we're not using phrases like human capital.
Yeah, I agree. Or you're a number,
Mhm.
what have you, things that, and that kind of gets me into something that I've been anxious to chat with you about on this topic is the root cause of a lot of this, whether it's toxic behavior or it's really the way people feel is what's most important. And
Yes.
the root cause of that, I have a view, Catherine, that it originates back in the 1970s when shareholder value and profits became the thing. And that was what was the most important thing, was generate a return for the shareholder at any cost. And then that manifested itself in the 80s, in the 90s, and even today as well, even through the pandemic,
Yeah.
with some few exceptions. Profits dictate the actions of ownership,
Right.
leadership,
Right.
and all the way, except for perhaps the people that matter the most in delivering the brand, which are people transacting with customers where money is made and lost. It's interesting because they feel a bit differently, that maybe it shouldn't be profits before people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we've seen that in probably the US is the not the role model country for great leadership behavior, I think, is, I'm
Agreed.
putting that politely. And the
Yeah.
evidence of that is in something called the Great Resignation, where
Right.
people are just fed up of a profits before people type of root cause. Anyway, that's kind of my view on what is the real root cause of all of this. And
I agree
then we
with
need people.
you.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, think of the 80s and 90s, the Demi Moore and who's the other actor, the male actor. The two of them were
Oh
in a
yeah,
bunch of movies about awful
Michael
Michael
Douglas.
Douglas.
Yeah,
Yeah, the two of
yeah,
them, it's like pop culture celebrated that kind of leadership in the
exactly.
several
Yep.
movies that were out related to that. I'm pretty sure,
Mhm.
don't quote me on this, but it was Forbes or Fortune did like a list of kind of the worst bosses ever, but it was kind of, highlighting them and giving them attention.
Yes.
It wasn't worst boss, how awful, it was worst, meanest
Mm.
boss, how great tone to it. And so, yeah, we definitely celebrated that. And it is just so weird that I even have a job, that any of us who do culture have a job, because it
It
seems like
is.
as
Yes.
humans that we would just care about other humans, but it's fascinating to me. And I think too, it's just the movement of a paradigm over time. I mean, if you think about the 50s, I was not alive, but from what I can tell, it was very still not treating people as humans because of the work-life balance. It was like you went to work and you were a machine, and then you came home and you were with your family. There was no email and checking your phone at night.
Right.
So even though there was maybe a little more work-life balance, it was like, go to work, be a machine, come home and be with your family. And then as that started to shift, we've moved into people still being machines, but also we're going to pretend to care about work-life balance and mental health. And then the pandemic really shot up the interest in wellness and whole self wellness. But I read an article recently from the McKinsey Health Institute where they were essentially saying, look, people, the number one cause of burnout is your workplace. So if you're going to engage in wellness, you got to look at your workplace. So who cares if you give people an EAP program if they're still so burnt out because they're expected to work 12 hours. So, I've been saying those types of things for years. So it was nice to have McKinsey Institute back me up.
Well, you know these things, and I do too, having transformed cultures in large companies before. And it really comes down to, in my opinion, the level of it. You've got it right when the engagement is tight, and tight engagement is engagement above HPO, right? And it's where people are aligned with the mission of the company, and they are going to, using the analogy that everybody during our era would be familiar with, would be everybody's job at NASA is to put a person on the moon, and period, end of story. And the janitor feels just as important as everybody else. That is the type of engagement that ultimately that you want, but we don't really see that a lot in today's
and
world.
That's another problem, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier about terminology / putting things in boxes. I got news for you. If you have an employee engagement program, because you're trying to get people to feel inspired enough to give you the 100% of their effort as often as possible, then don't also have them work 12 hours a week or allow somebody to mistreat others. So it's like these things are not one or the other. There are, that you got to do it all. That's why it's a culture initiative. And so and same with things like DEI. We talk about harassment and DEI as if they're very separate too. And they're not. And we talk about engagement, it's separate from culture and psychological safety. So it's all working together. My son is entertaining himself going through my I guess we'll let him be unless he starts.
Yeah, just let him be. He's Ethan's doing great, so no problem at all. No, I think you're right about that as well. And that, when people ask me, how do I define inclusive diversity, I define it as higher profits. And people look at me kind of cross-eyed and say, what does that mean? Right. And because that is the way to, I built my career mainly working as a minority in other countries. And so I had the opportunity to see things from a slightly different lens than a lot of people do as well. And that's one thing that it taught me, is that having a diverse and including everybody in the decision-making, including how they feel about being in that environment, certainly makes a huge difference in terms of engagement and performance, which leads to higher profits, lower turnover, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in that space, I think, just to get people not just to understand the definition, but to understand what are they going to do about it, right?
Yep, that's for sure. And that's the thing that's frustrating, is just employers seeing things so different. Or with COVID, it was all of a sudden there's an attention on vulnerability and burnout, but then I still see my clients and lots of other companies still giving too much work. And I had a client and I had a mutual breakup because he had everyone in the whole entire office was required to hit some crazy number of billable hours, like 93%. And I would be telling him, managers can't be 93%. And in fact, one of them, the highest producer, she was like 105% billable hours. And it's like, how is she managing? And she had the biggest team. And then everybody was frustrated with her because they didn't like the way she interacted with them. I'm like, because she's trying to be this superstar work-wise, but then she's also being asked to manage. So I was always telling them, you got to drop their hours, even, 89%, give them 4% of their time to actually manage and train. And, and of course, then he's like, there's so much turnover. We have burnout. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. That's why we broke up.
Yeah.
Like, so, you're not listening to me.
Yeah. So how much of this, Catherine, is the way that people are leadership is measured, or is it the wrong people are in leadership? What do you find when you're working, let's say, across small businesses, and then maybe you could talk about some of the differences between small businesses and Fortune 500 companies in terms of what's really causing this?
It goes back to what you were saying earlier, this idea, or that what we've been saying, that we treat people like human capital, they're machines, that we're not paying attention in the right ways to things like burnout. And we celebrate profits and results. And so hopefully I'm going to give a long answer. Sorry, I got a lot going on in my head. So one thing that I do is specialize in coaching leaders who have been accused of bullying or harassment. Often, I'd say 60% of the time, my client has been accused of a hostile work environment. There was an investigation. It's technically not illegal, hostile work environment, but it's still not working. And now the organization wants me to coach them and help them change. So in an organization like that, the reason that person's been allowed to act that way, and in fact been rewarded for it because they've been promoted through the ranks, is they get results. And so that's a perfect example of a CEO going, that I hear you, HR, that you keep telling me this person's causing harm, but they get results. And so I'd rather you not talk to them about it. The CEO tiptoes around that person's behavior, and they'll say, hey, you got to be a little bit nicer, but they're not really addressing it head on. Versus if the receptionist was going around acting that way, it'd be gone in a flash. We can replace you. So that's a perfect example of profits and results first. And so back to what you were saying, we need to adjust that. And so what I see across all of my clients are a couple things. One is, because leaders are focused on profits and results, they forget that human piece. So for example, managers are rarely trained on intercultural communication skills, interpersonal communication skills, managing people, having feedback conversations that includes giving and receiving feedback. Like I said earlier, coaching somebody who engages in behavior that's not okay, but not illegal. So there's a huge array of tools that managers are not given. And it's because the leader, I think it doesn't occur to the leaders, or they think, well, that's a cost, the training for Civility Partners is a line item on my budget, without recognizing that there's a cost. Just because they can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. So that's one big piece. The other is companies don't lean into their core values. So we use core values as a marketing line item, like it's on our website, and maybe we do some nomination awards around things like core values, but core values have to be infiltrated into every conversation, every minute of every day. And employers don't do that either, because they don't know how, and they don't recognize the value of doing that. So in terms of small businesses versus things like Fortune 500s, it's harder to change culture in a Fortune 500, of course. But I think there's some benefit there, because if you're a manager in a Fortune 500 company, at the very least, you can influence your own team without anybody noticing. And it can work good or bad. I could be a complete horrible person in a Fortune 500 and nobody would notice, or I can at least make my own team happy and nobody would notice. Obviously the latter is the better version of that, but versus in a small company, everybody knows who the bad people are and who the good people are.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, and but the one thing that will get noticed if you do that, and let's say you're working in a large company, a lot of people watching this program are in that scenario, is that it will be noticed in your performance because your people will be more engaged, your attrition will be lower, your need for recruiting the demand will decrease because you're hanging on to people more, you're developing, you're growing the people, and all of that added up should lead to more productivity instead of just bringing people in and beating them saying, I need you to be more productive. I need you to be more productive. So there is another way to do it. Flip it upside down. And that's really what I think we're saying here. You can make a big difference, right?
Yes, 100%. And that's the thing is leaders have to be willing to take that risk, right? That if you were to have a serious conversation with the bullying executive VP, for example, and if they did up and leave, which never happens, that's what cracks me up too. CEOs are so worried about it. I'm like, they're not going to respond by saying, fine, I'm going to bully somewhere else. I quit.
Right.
But, if they did, the organization is so deathly afraid of that. And it's like, you don't need to have a pen.
Help me open.
No, you don't need to have a pen in your hand. Why don't you go back in the living room? Remember, we were going to go to the play place if you were going to be quiet. Do you remember that? We might be running out of time here.
That's fine. So
yeah, three-year-olds don't have a limit.
No problem. Yeah, I think that I think if I could just I think that LinkedIn is having a problem with the comments today because normally we get a lot. Padre John from Ghana, I just got your comment, and that's the only one that I'm seeing in here. So first of all, for those of you that have put comments in here, I'm really not seeing them, and I'm looking at 3 different devices here. So I think that LinkedIn might be having a problem. So please continue to put them in here, and I will get to them. Catherine and I will get to them after the fact as well, so we can kind of keep going. So I wanted to mention that as well. Padre John, and the one comment that I do see is that a Padre saying a workplace that involves the workforce is more empowering and listening to their input so that they can have a voice in decision making. That's definitely a winning formula. Any comment on that, Catherine? Yeah.
You know what? I mean, I have a small company, so maybe it's easy for me to say this, but I rarely make a decision by myself. I constantly ask my team what they think about things rolling around in my head, and then ultimately it's my decision. But I rarely, if ever, do I make a decision on my own. It's related to the business. So I see the value in that. And I have actually a fairly young team, and that's one of the ways they get to learn and grow. Where would, they could go to a Fortune 500 company, but they would be treated as their age is. But here at my company, they're helping me make decisions to build, and that's pretty cool for them. So
that's that type of collaboration and mutually respectful work environment really goes a long way towards personal growth as well.
Yep, exactly.
So, without a doubt as well. So Catherine, a lot of the work you do, the way I view it is that it's helping to shape what the future of work is going to be for, not too many years from now. The millennials and the Gen Zers will comprise the majority of the workforce, and including leadership. It's just a matter of time before the dinosaurs are pushed out and these next generations are kind of, moving in here as well. And do you have any advice or any observations from the younger generations? You just touched on it a bit within your company, but how about in larger Fortune 500 companies or some of the work you do in the national media around these younger generations? Any advice for them on how to navigate these toxic environments? Because the reality is that there are a lot of defects out there as well. What advice would you give to the younger generations?
Stand your ground. The reason that toxic workplace happens is because we allow it. And, that was my situation. I watched it happen. Right. And that was actually the pinnacle of my curiosity was related to that. How are 49 people letting one person make all 49 of us uncomfortable? And so the key there is standing up for each other and ourselves and not allowing it. And so younger generations, and I think we see it, people already joke about how they demand respect and how dare they I had to work for my respect. And that's one of the big dichotomies between baby boomers and the younger generation. But good for them.
Right.
We can be frustrated by it all day long, but good for them. And so it's an interesting social experiment. It'll be really interesting to see 10, 20 years from now, if what these conversations that you and I are having, what they look like, and there is always going to be tough people to work with. And some of them will grown up in that Fortune 500, 890s environment that we were talking about earlier. And so they'll keep it, but that's my advice to the younger generation. Stand your ground, stick with that. I think the other thing too is the internet. They grew up with it. So they've grown up understanding that there's an entire world that they know nothing about and they can easily go and explore it. I don't like it here. I'll go apply somewhere else. No problem.
Yeah, that's what's happening. Country. That's what's happening now in the U.S. with this resignation, right? And it's really unbelievable what is happening with that. But people do have choices, and I guess. And what would your advice be to the baby boomers, the people in charge right now that know that they've got a big problem with turnover? They know that they have not found a way to connect with the needs of the younger generations. What would your advice to them be?
I always say start with discovery. So you can't know what they want or need or what makes them tick unless you do a climate assessment, as I call it. And so that's where we start. So of course my answer is kind of focused on what I think is the right thing to do. But we talked earlier about engagement. Doing an engagement survey is useful, but it doesn't tell you about the entire culture. It only measures engagement, right? So we do climate assessments where we look at engagement, communication, leadership, relationships, all sorts of things. Do you, inclusivity? Do you feel psychologically safe? And then we can work with the organization to address the needs of their workforce. So that's the first step. Start with discovery, do an assessment, and then be okay with the results. They're not all going to be great, and be willing to address those things that aren't so great. And then secondly, we've said it already, recognize that these are people who work for you and they have families, and because of technology, they're not able to turn it off when they get home. And, I've started using this phrase recently of work-life integration. We talk about work-life balance, but that's not a thing. Even if I go to a party tonight and someone asks me what I do, all of a sudden I'm talking about work because it's my identity. And it is for many of us. And so, there is no work-life balance. It's work-life integration. So, and we want people to be the same person all the time. You want them to be the same person on Facebook that they are on LinkedIn, essentially. So recognize that and lean into it, that these are people, they have lives, and we're just not working for a paycheck anymore. That's not the only exchange.
Yeah, I agree. And I just like to add to that for those watching this is that don't micromanage. The days of micromanaging people and hiring competent people and then telling them what to do, those days, there might have been a time and an era for that, but that just doesn't work with the younger generations. Catherine, if I need to learn something new, in my life and my day-to-day living, I go to YouTube. I go to the younger generations. If I need to learn to do something quickly, it's usually either a millennial or a Gen Z that I go to learn something new about technology, about Apple's latest software update, what that really means, for me,
It's a 15-year-old to tell you what.
Yeah, exactly. And what are the cooking times in an air fryer for chicken? things like this. It's the millennials and the Gen Zers, even younger, that I go to for that information. And if you really think about who is on YouTube, a big part of them are that as well, right? So there's a lot of creativity, and my advice would be for the older generations to really find a way to tap into that, because that's what it is, and you're not going to do that by micromanaging people and bossing people around.
Markers, bud. Can you play with that for a couple more minutes?
Yeah.
He needs to go with gray headlights in his truck. I just had an epiphany while you were talking.
Sure.
One of the, the things that people complain about with the younger generation is that they demand respect and they want to be treated sort of higher than where they're at in life, right? And then you got the baby boomers saying, I had to work through all of this and go through the ranks. I'm not going to do that. But I think that's a great point where you said we go to the younger generation. They're problem solvers by nature because they had the internet, and so they see themselves as problem solvers, versus older generations. Like, you come in and you learn about the problems and someone teaches you how to solve them.
Right.
And then you can move into supervisor role, and then you'll learn about more problems and how to solve them. And then you can be a manager. But these days it's like, oh, I could be a manager. Get me on LinkedIn. I'll watch, 50 courses on how to be a good manager. And then I should be able to be one. And I hadn't thought about that until just right now, that's probably where some of that comes from. Like, I want you to respect me as a problem solver, and I can figure it out. And that's probably why my team works so well. They're 25, the two main ones that are sort of my leadership team. I'm, twice their age, but they have a lot of great ideas, and they say things where I'm like, at 25, I was not saying things like that.
Wow. Yeah, exactly. And lever that, tap into that. If you're a Gen X, a baby boomer, tap into that, because the way that you did it doesn't really apply anymore because of how people have been educated and the tools that are available now as well. I think that's what Catherine's saying. So tap into it. It's right there. And for the younger generations, march on, as Catherine said. I would second that idea. Just press forward, and you can find greener grass. Okay. If the grass isn't green where you're at. Okay. And so it's a myth, in my opinion, that the grass isn't greener. That might have applied back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, but it does not apply now.
Yeah.
Right.
That's for sure.
That's definitely as well. Catherine, tell us, as we start to wrap up here, what is the best way for people to engage with you? Is it LinkedIn? Is it directly? Tell us a bit about that.
All of the above. Yeah. If you Google my name, I'm all over the internet. LinkedIn is a great place. I have an alter ego there 8 hours a day. She'll connect you to the right person. Or you can always email us at info@civilitypartners.com. We really pride ourselves on the content that we put out. As my marketing office mate says, that we are content machine. So sign up for our e-newsletter to get some quick tips every single week. My son's drawing on his foot. I see what you did. I'm just making sure you keep it on your foot. So yeah, we, of course, my LinkedIn courses. So really always trying to get messages out there like these. So connect with me in whatever way works.
And what is the best way for people to actually find your courses on LinkedIn? Because that's already out there, right? So is that through the learning?
Yep, mechanism? Through LinkedIn Learning. Yep, if you go to LinkedIn Learning, which you'll have if you're a premium member. Also, a lot of organizations deliver or provide LinkedIn Learning as a benefit, so your organization may have a subscription to it. So you can go to LinkedIn Learning and just type my name, and there's all sorts of things in there about, and there's a variety of languages. Several of them are global. So yeah.
And there's 48 of them. So, that's a lot of content. So I would just like to provide some additional advice to the younger generations as well, and the bosses or the leaders that are in charge, the Gen X's and the baby boomers, to maybe go in and take a couple of those courses just to get a sense for what great looks like and what great feels like, and do a couple of the things that you've learned in those courses for a month and see if it makes a difference. I guarantee you on my reputation that it will.
Well,
it will
thank
make
you.
a huge difference, because what these courses do, they start to steer you away from a profits before people. And look, I understand I had to deliver profits for 30 years, multinational companies, and I understand. But the day that I realized that there's a better way to drive profits by putting people first and focusing more on how I would generate those profits, the profits then soared. Takes a little bit longer, but what happens is that those profits not only increase at a faster clip rate, but they also stay with you. And I'll give you an example. What do I mean by stay with you? Well, a lot of companies generate a profit today, and then they wind up paying out a remediation in a lawsuit, or mis-selling, wrongdoing, something because of the toxic culture. So at $10 of profit earned last year, you're now paid out $8 this year in remediation. There's a lot of that stuff going on around the world, not just in the US. So when you look at profits, look at it through an intermediate to long-term lens. And even if you're a unit manager, do it that way. And you'll find that the way that HR and your bosses are measuring you, you're going to look good on that, because your engagement's going to be above your peers. Your net promoter scores, when you're looking at customer satisfaction, they're going to be higher. All the different indicators are going to look stronger as well. Would there be any part of that advice that you'd modify, Catherine?
No, I agree with all of that. And I guess one extra thing is you could, if you are doing something like a climate assessment or net promoter scores, you can hold managers and unit directors and everybody accountable to certain scores. So
Right.
if you are analytic and you need KPIs and results, focus some of those results on the scores of the people stuff.
Yeah, and weigh the people. Don't just have it kind of in the scorecard
Right.
as a line item or something, which means that you pay people off of it when it comes time for the bonuses. You look at, I talk a lot, Catherine, as you know, about elite performance and the fact that if a true elite performer is elite in the top decile, not just in one category, but in the balance categories, right, of customers, of the community that they operate in, and
Right.
of their colleagues, their teamwork, and the different things that way. And if you look at things, that's how I define elite performance. If you're a great salesperson and yet you're mis-selling to people, you're not elite, right? You just don't fall into that category, because you've actually have cheated to get the job done. So to be an elite performer, you do it the right way. You do it in a collaborative. I think collaboration is really important. It's especially important to the younger generations.
Yep.
And you collaborate and you work really well with others. So I think that leadership, I think what we're saying here is that you're going to get what you measure. So be careful about what you're measuring, right?
And I have to go now.
Okay, that's fine. Catherine, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you all for tuning in here. And I'll look forward to having you on again at some point in the future, Catherine.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. And thanks for your patience all with my son wandering around.
No
Thank
problem
you.
at all. And thank